GingerGM.
Well, for this video, I'm going to tell you a little love story. A story that's going to bring a tear to our hearts. If you shed a tear, don't be embarrassed. We are following the journey of two brave, intrepid soldiers. Garry the G-Pawn, one of the heroes of this romantic yet powerful game, and Harry the H-Pawn. Only one of them will survive to cause victory when Garry met Harry. So anyway, enough of that. Yeah, basically I haven't done any videos because I've been away playing 2 tournaments in a row, and I've played the most chess in the last 3 weeks that I've played for a long time. So first of all I had the Isle of Man competition. So before we get into the analysis, let me just tell you a little bit about what I've been doing in case you're intrigued. If you're not, well, sorry, fast forward or log off. So the Isle of Man competition was, I think, probably is the strongest ever Open to be held in Britain, maybe in the world. And there's the Open. Let me just find the right thing. Here we are. It's a great opportunity to play some good chess. So this is my first tournament, and you can see my results over there on that side. Pretty good. A bit annoying I lost the last round in not particularly great fashion, but I felt like I was playing some very good chess. I feel like I'm starting to get back to my best again. At least I performed over 2,500. Gained some nice rating points, 10 rating points, and I had some. I nearly defeated a lot of very strong players. The game I'm going to show you here is my 6th round game against Suri Vaibhav from India, rated 2597. I had the white pieces in this game, and you can see it was also written about by Malcolm Payne in the Telegraph. And this is my first tournament. It went on for 9-10 days, 1 game a day, pure fighting chess. And one of the main reasons I went away was actually to try and qualify for a big tournament in December, the British Knockout Championships, where about 10 of the best players in Britain face each other in a knockout competition with very good prize money. And the Isle of Man was a warm-up tournament to another tournament I went directly to, the 4NCL tournament, where the top 2 players qualified for the knockout competition. And so I was treating it as a warm-up, trying to get in shape. And I'll talk about the Isle of Man tournament in another day. I'm only going to take 2 games from the Isle of Man that I'm going to show you, 2 what I think are the most interesting games, and 2 games from the 4NCL, because of course there's another competition starting today that we might all be a bit interested in, and I will be streaming today 1 o'clock until 3 o'clock, 2 hours before the World Championship starts, and I'm going to give you my lowdown on what I think is going to happen there. But all in all, I'm back now. I'm back from my travels, so I'm going to be doing more videos, more streaming, no internet problems, and I'm in front of my computer. Okay, so let's go on with the game. Well, one opening I've been trying to play, I like changing a little bit, and I've been playing a bit more, is knight to f3 with a particular setup in mind. And I'll probably do a separate lesson on this opening at another moment, but I generally in the past have started with very sharp gambits, and now I'm trying another approach. I'm thinking, well, look, I'm a very tactical player normally, but there's nothing wrong with starting the game slowly, because in most games tactics will happen anyway. You don't always have to force them. So I just wanted to take a slightly more calm approach. My opponent played knight to f6 and now c4, so we're kind of transposing to an English setup. e6, and here b3, placing the bishop on this good diagonal. And well, the main idea of this setup, just to tell you very quickly, I'm not going to make this video too long so I don't bore you too much, is to basically go e3, bishop b2, knight c3. And in a lot of cases, depending on what black does, you can either play h4 or g4, as we're going to see in this game. And I'll do a separate video, maybe even a DVD on this, because it's a very simple setup to learn. I even did a stream on this before, which you might have caught with this idea in mind. Now, my opponent went for a Queen's Indian setup with b6. There's many different setups he can do, but we generally do the same thing. So I placed my bishop on this powerful diagonal. Bishop b7, my opponent's done the same. And now in this position, I played a sensible developing move. Now, there are a number of ways you can approach this position, but I wanted to wait and see what my opponent was going to do. So I played knight to c3. Now, the idea of this is if my opponent plays d5, which is a move that black often plays, we now play e3. It's very important to stop black from playing d4. You know, if he ever threatens to play the move d4, we must take on d5. This is an important thing to remember. And for example, if black takes back with a pawn, we must stop him going d5. Generally, there are exceptions, and we play d4 here ourselves. So this is what I was kind of waiting to see what my opponent was going to play. And here my opponent played pawn to c5, which must be a very natural move. And I now had to decide on what setup to adopt. Now, I can play g3 here, and this is probably a decent positional move because generally the bishop fianchettoed on the king side. I think it was Garry who first said this. Let's say something like bishop e7, bishop g2, castles, castles. This is a more calm positional approach. Normally the bishop which is defended and fianchettoed on the king side, my bishop on g2, is much superior, well maybe not much, but superior to the bishop undefended on the queen side if you compare these two guys. Again, this is going back to Anish Giri, a quote I remember him saying. Well, why? Because, well, the bishop is defended here, so there's all sort of tactics. At some point, I might better move this knight away, and at some point, you know, unleash my bishop against this, and my bishop is always defended. I mean, just for example, let's just, you know, a pattern that can occur here is something like, I'm going to play some bad moves to black, knight e8, queen c2, and now let's play h6, and here there's a very good tactic just demonstrating this knight move, knight g5, and this threatens queen h7, checkmate, and if, well, black has to take this knight off, we can now take on b7, winning material. So this is the kind of thing to watch out for. So this is one very decent way to play, but when I'm playing this opening nowadays, I have a particular idea in mind. Like I said, this is my stage one, should I say. When I try to explain openings, I try to put it in stages, and again, not too much depth I'm going to go into here in the opening. I'll leave that for another day. But my idea is generally to move the h-pawn or the g-pawn. Now, if I'm going to move the h-pawn, it's normally to support a piece coming to g5 and attack on h7. So, for example, in some situations, my opponent did play bishop e7. You could even consider, I think queen c2 first is normal. You're getting maybe ready to castle this side. And let's say black does castle now. Now you can consider playing this h4 move, with the idea of going knight g5, and then trying to checkmate on h7. Again, let's just demonstrate this with some bad moves from black. Let's say d6, d5, much better move. Knight g5. If h6, we can just leave our knight here. And maybe now we can even play something mental like knight d5. And the point is I want to eliminate the knight on f6. I want to checkmate on h7. And this is the general idea of the opening. So it's Harry or Garry. But instead, what I wanted to try and do here, and what I did do, was push Garry. And this to me seemed like a very interesting possibility. Now, what is the idea behind this move? Well, the idea is g7. I'm trying to open up lines to g7. My bishop on b2 is fantastically placed. I want to open that up. If my opponent takes on g4, I want to go rook g1, and I want to bring my rook to that square. So, for example, you know, if the knight moves, which it will have to do, so I've got h3, rook takes g7, and I think I'm doing very well here because my rook is very well positioned to attack. So g4 is actually quite a normal idea in this kind of structure, and I just want to clear this knight out the way and start an attack here. And this is the kind of unbalanced position I very much enjoy playing, and it's one reason I was happy to get this here. You know, there's no theory on this. We're out of the theory really on move 7, and we've got a unique, interesting game ahead of us. So my opponent showed no fear, and he castled kingside, and I thought, well, I may as well continue with g5. And now my opponent has decided where to move his knight. He decided to make some exchanges, and here I took off that knight because I want to open up my bishop. And now I played my next move maybe a little bit too quickly even. I think it's more accurate here to play h4 immediately. The point being that if something like knight c6, d3, my opponent's bishop is not going to be able to go back to g6 safely because I already have a pawn on h4. And you can see at Garry and Harry are rolling up the board, and h5 is causing a lot of mischief here. So I think that was a bit more accurate, but I played rook g1 because I obviously had ideas of eventually trying to get to this square here. You know, if somehow I can get this pawn out of the way, which is not unbelievable. I mean, sometimes the knight can even come this way to h6, which is one very adventurous maneuver. My opponent developed knight to c6. I played d3, bishop to g6, and now I played h4. And my plan is now quite clear. I want to try to play h5 when it can't be captured. So in order to play that, I need to move my knight out the way on f3. So something like knight d2, knight h2, h5, and attack. Then either g6 or h6. Just open up the position there. My opponent met a wing attack with a central attack, and this is a good strategy. Striking in the centre whilst I'm striking in the side of the board. And now I play knight h2 because, as I've said before, it's all about using Harry and Garry. And h5 is now coming. And the other idea is my knight may, again, like I mentioned before, have possibilities at some point of coming to one of these two squares, either h6 or f6 with a big check, and then if I take with a pawn later on, maybe my rook opens up. You know, I'm just trying to keep as much flexibility. Now, the reason I can get away with this rather outrageous plan is that the centre, even though I don't necessarily have full control, my opponent has a bit more space in the centre with these pawns. It's quite closed. If there was many open lines in the centre, you can't really attack on the wing. You have to have a closed centre or be in control of the centre to attack on the side. Otherwise, your king is going to be too exposed. But here the centre is quite closed, so my opponent can't open it up. Now, my opponent played the move I expected. You know, h5 is a serious threat, and then his bishop has to go to this square, and it's going to be in serious trouble. So he has to give his bishop some luff. So he played f5, and now the bishop can retreat to one of these two squares. And this is my first big think of the game, and I think I have to say I was quite proud the way I played here. Now, probably the position is okay for my opponent. It's roughly equal. The first thing I don't want to do is take here, even though it opens up my rook on g1. Now my opponent starts opening up lines towards me, and he's going to get rid of my good bishop on b2. And by taking on f6, I've freed up two of my opponent's pieces. I freed up the rook and I freed up the bishop. So I've given him freedom. I don't want to allow that. I've got no realistic attacking chances here. I've only got one rook looking at his king. That's not good enough. And my opponent is very harmoniously placed. He can even play d4 soon. So this is completely wrong. So now I had to have a big think about what I was trying to do and what my opponent was trying to do. My first thought, and this is really key in a game of chess, if you guys want to improve, you know, up to this point I've played reasonably quickly. And chess really comes down to 2 or 3 key moments. And in those moments, you need to take your time. You need to analyse. You need to slow down and work out exactly what you're trying to achieve in the game and what your opponent's trying to achieve. You need to push your achievements through whilst withholding your and keeping your opponent from achieving his goals. And this is the case here. What's my opponent trying to achieve? Well, what I thought he was trying to achieve, he has the space in the centre and he has this flexibility with these pawns. And the kind of thing I thought he might try to achieve is to go d4 and e5. And if he can get these two pawns to these two squares, he completely blunts out this bishop. He'll be looking at a brick wall. He gets a space advantage in the centre, and he might then bring these pawns forwards, and my position could become very dangerous. So if I play a normal-ish move like bishop e2, I allow my opponent to do exactly what he wants to do. d4, and now let's say I try to castle queenside, queen d2. My opponent plays e5, and you've got to always be so aware of what your opponent's trying to achieve in chess, because it's a constant battle about you pushing your own ideas but stopping your opponent's ideas. And here I don't like my position. I think I'm struggling here. I have these two pawns, but what precisely are these guys doing? Nothing. So this is what I got to stop. Now, my next idea is obviously to keep pushing. So I was thinking, well, if I go here, my opponent probably comes back to e8. Because if he comes to f7, this is a mistake. It allows me to go g6. Why is this a mistake? Well, it's probably a losing mistake. He wants to play the move h6 against this, keeping everything blocked, keeping the lines blocked. But he can't because I win a piece. So he can't do that here. So he has to go back to e8. For example, now if I play g6... h6, and has this ever helped me? No, it hasn't. In actual fact, I've just given my opponent this square, and he can improve his position by putting his bishop on this square. So I've only helped my opponent here. So my next thought was, well, what about if I go h6? And I thought here my opponent would have to play g6, and now this pawn is on pre, so I was considering knight to f3. But again, my opponent plays d4. And potentially e5 next move. And I haven't really stopped this idea. So my bishop's a bit blocked. I need to open up lines, keep some flexibility. I then saw a possibility of playing bishop g7 first. Trying to angle for rook here, and then knight to f3. Because at least now, if d4, my bishop is outside of this pawn on d4. It's on the other side. It's more active. But I didn't like this because I thought my opponent could sacrifice the exchange with bishop takes g5, bishop takes here, king takes, and with him maybe picking up another pawn, his dark square bishop is all of a sudden incredibly powerful and he has great compensation. My remaining pieces are lacking motivation, and we all need a bit of motivation in life. So hence why I played my next move. And I'm spending more time at this moment because I'm trying to explain my thought process, how I came to play this key move. f4. This is a key move. I'm trying to control e5. I'm trying to also control g5. But mainly it's controlling and stopping my opponent playing e5. If I can do this and my knight comes here, I keep good control over these two squares, meaning my bishop remains more active. My opponent played queen d6. Okay, I continue now with h5, bishop to e8, and now h6. And my idea is coming together. I was amazed at my opponent's next move, which I think is suicidal. I expected g6. Here, I was just going to play something along the lines of either queen d2 or knight to f3. Knight to f3 looks fully possible and playable, controlling these two squares. And if something like d4, now queen d2. The difference now is that I have a great possibility at some point of getting rid of this pawn here. I have a lot of pressure against this pawn. My opponent cannot secure it easily with e5 because we now do a very typical breaking maneuver. We take on e5, and at some point, at some point we are going to open it up. I mean, I guess here I can play bishop e2 with the idea of taking on d4 very soon. I'm castling queenside anyway, and as soon as I open up, this bishop becomes great. So this is my general idea why the pawn's on f4, and this is what I'm trying to achieve. The other thing I think here after g6, knight to f3, if you look at my opponent's bishops, this bishop can't get onto any of these squares because my pawns control these squares. So that is quite a bad piece. My opponent's other bishop, the light square bishop, is also not great. It can't find a good square. So I think here I should be better positionally. And this is what I'm aiming for. I'm aiming to constrict and push. This is what you've got to do in your chess games, guys. Restrict your opponent, push. So my opponent played an amazing move here now. He took on h6. Totally by surprise. Too risky. So goodbye, Harry. The love story is gone. We're now going to leave it to Garry. Pawn takes h6 check. And I understand why my opponent wanted to play this. He did not like the static position that occurred in the other line. But here, this is incredibly dangerous for him. Queen h5. Threatening, rook takes g6 and queen takes g6 mate. So king f7 is forced. And here, I really wanted to play bishop to e2. You know, just out of beauty. But one thing I'm trying to stop myself doing nowadays is going always for the more beautiful move and not the best move. You know, beauty over perfection. I don't know. I mean, I love beauty, but if I want to become stronger, I've got to bring myself down. The point is here, if he takes here, this is checkmate. But my opponent plays something like bishop f6, and actually here, I think I might be losing all of a sudden. So simply queen h3. My queen is well placed here, as we will see. d4 has to be played. And now castles. This is my plan. Bishop f6. And now we have another key positional idea. Pause the video here. This is such an important moment in the game. If you don't find the right concept for white here, you could even get a worse position. My next move is so important. What is white trying to achieve? What squares are important? What pieces do I need to get to those squares? What exchanges do I need to make? This could really, if you look to my first master method, I talk about what pieces you need to exchange and why, and how to notice those exchanges. This is a great test for you. White to play. What should white play here? Pause if you need to. Well, what I want to do is get control of this square, and I want to land my knight on this square. What two pieces are controlling this square of my opponents? The bishop and the knight on c6. So by playing bishop g2, my opponent can't move the knight now because I take the rook. When the rook moves, I give up my bishop for that knight. My bishop is not very good, actually. I don't have anything I can attack with it. And now I play knight to f3. And I think positionally, my opponent is really losing here. If you saw this, well done. The whole point of this is if my opponent ever takes on e3, we now play bishop takes f6. And at some point, we have this absolutely diabolical knight that my opponent can't deal with. This knight can never be moved away from this lovely central square. My opponent is left with a horrendously passive bishop on g6. And this is winning positionally for me without a shadow of doubt. So if you saw this positional idea, well done. So my opponent realized this and he tried to start counterplay of b5. It doesn't work. I just take on d4. And if my opponent took here, there's a very good move here. I thought at the time I was now going to play d5 with the same positional idea. I want to eliminate the bishops so my knight can come in here. For example, let's say, I don't know, what should we say? Pawn takes. Bishop takes here, and my knight comes in, and I'm positionally winning. This is a winning piece. Also got queen h4 with mating ideas as well. So my opponent took on d4, and now rook ge1, trying to keep control of this square. Now, why did I move this rook away? Because I thought at some point my opponent had to take here, and then I wanted my rook attacking this pawn here. The problem my opponent mainly has here is the bishop on g6. It's a big pawn, not playing any part. King g8, and now I play knight e5. Now, ideally, I would want to swap off the bishops for playing this, but this is also very strong. Because my opponent ever takes it, of course I take with the rook. I have one idea here, and that is to put pressure on this isolated pawn on d4. When I win this isolated pawn, which I should be able to do, my bishop will be free to wreak havoc. So my opponent played queen d6, and now rook d2. My rook comes across to attack. King h8, rook g2, a5. Now, a typical mistake here would be to get greedy. And this is an amateur mistake. Had I taken on this square with something, I may win a pawn. Let's say something like this. But in this position, I've got my great knight has gone, my opponent's bad bishop has gone. Positionally speaking, my opponent has improved his position no ends. Only for one pawn, I released the tension too soon. So I saw a much stronger idea. What piece is not playing part? My queen's not playing part. And by playing queen f3, a4, my opponent trying to attack, I can now take on g6. Point being, if bishop takes e5, the pawn attacks the queen. So he has to take back. And now, after king h7, if the king goes to g8, it's really in a mating net here. I could probably bring my queen to h5 and my rook to g1. And there's no way he's going to be able to defend against this horrible attack. And the point after king here is my queen now comes in to b7. And my opponent resigned here because it is game over. As I calculated in advance, if he takes the knight, we go rook g1 check. And maybe the nicest variation is something like king to h5. And now the queen comes back to this square. Bishop h4, rook g5, king h6, queen h4 mate, all forced. And there's nothing my opponent can do here except, you know, he's going to be in major material damage. If he takes on h6, well, at least he gets rid of Harry. But then rook h1 check, queen h7 mate is coming next. My queen has this very nice idea of either coming to h1 or h7 in these lines. And if rook d7, well, the simplest is queen takes d7 and then knight takes f8, and I win the whole house here. And there's nothing else can do. I mean, I thought maybe my opponent could fight on with bishop to e7, when I'd probably just take off with the queen, because my opponent's position is absolutely helpless here. He's dropping a lot of his pawns, and the knight and bishop are too strong. So that was the final position. Move 32, checkmate there. That's probably the game I was happiest with from the Isle of Man. I thought some interesting ideas. I'll try to cover one more game from the Isle of Man and then two games that I played from the 4NCL. I'm probably actually going to pick two white games from the Isle of Man and two black games from the 4NCL. And I'll let you know if I did qualify for the British Knockout, where, you know, the qualifiers have the honour of playing against Adams, probably Short, David Howe, Gwaine Jones, Sadler, Luke McShane. You know, it's a really strong tournament. First prize being about £15,000 for this knockout. So I'll let you know how that goes. But I'm going to stop there. Quite a long video in the end. I apologise for that. I find it so hard to keep them short. I think with these games, it's best to demonstrate all the ideas. I know that's going to lose a lot of viewers, rather than doing short games and maybe not, you know, maybe superficially not going into everything, which I know some people do. But I have to show at least a lot of ideas I had. Obviously, there's many more, but we can't show them all in the space of a YouTube video. Now, if you're still here, do please remember that I will be streaming 1 o'clock until 3 o'clock. No, yeah, that's right, 1 until 3 today, just to warm up to the World Championships, and can't wait to see what happens there. So cheers, thank you very much. Please do like, please do subscribe to the channel. I'm also going to say a massive thank you. So I've got over 30,000 subscribers now. It feels fantastic. I'm going to do a mammoth stream at some point. I had a bit of a cold since playing the chess, so I'm in a bit of recovery, taking it a bit easy until I do that stream. Off any alcohol. I wasn't drinking while I was playing the chess, only on the last day celebrations, but that was enough. I was taking the chess very seriously during the two competitions, not drinking much at all. But the mammoth stream should involve some drinking, I feel. So thank you, and I'll see you again soon for another video. Bye for now.